Y'all know what's going on. It's time for another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and welcome to the show. Today I'm going to tell you a story about these two juveniles. One of them is named Jim and the other's name is Terry. They were both 15 years old when they got locked up for murder charges. Jim was charged with first-degree felony murder, and Terry was charged with second-degree murder. Jim's case came from when he was being a lookout man for two other people that got caught up in a robbery that turned murder, and he was charged with first-degree felony murder because he was basically the lookout. And he admits that he had been out in the neighborhoods robbing people and all of this and that, but he wasn't in the house when the gun was shot and the person was killed. But like I say, because he was the lookout man, he was charged with felony murder, first-degree felony murder, and he ended up in juvenile. Terry, he caught his case from selling drugs to somebody in the streets that ended up ODing and dying. Yeah, if you sell drugs to somebody and they die, you can be charged with second-degree murder. And in Terry's case, he was, as a juvenile. Now, when you go to the juvenile facility, you're locked up, separate from what I was told about this story anyway. The violent offenders are locked up in one certain part of the jail. They get to come out and they get to commune and be around everybody else, and they go to school and know all the activities. But when they're locked down, they're separated. Now, Jim and Terry, they were sellers, and they formed a bond because they had something in common. They thought often about their circumstances and situations, and making friends in the juvenile facility. And Jim was telling me, this story I'm telling you is from Jim's perspective, and you're going to understand why later on. But Jim was telling me how him and Terry used to talk all the time about what they wanted to do with their life, when they got out of this place and all of the things that they wanted to experience. Now, keep in mind, they're 14 years old at this particular time. So Jim goes to court first. He goes to court, and he's talking to his lawyer, and his lawyer is telling him all of this stuff about, they're going to try him as an adult. And if they try him as an adult, they could give him life in prison. And it scared him. And he talked to his parents about what he should do and all of the different things, the options that he had, which were not many. And his parents told him that they really didn't know what to tell him, but they were saddened that he found himself in that situation. So he felt as though, even though they were his parents, he felt as though he was left all alone to make a decision that no 14-year-old should have to make. So he told his lawyer, man, just do the best you can for me. I don't want to spend the rest of my life in prison. So the lawyer did the best that he could under the circumstances, he says. And Jim ended up with 45 years. 45 years. And listen to what I'm getting ready to say now, y'all. At 100%. This man is 14 years old, and he's told by his lawyer that he's going to receive a 45-year sentence at 100% if he pleads guilty. And the reason that his lawyer thought that was a good deal is because if he would have gotten a life sentence, he would have to spend 52 years in prison before he was able to get out. Now, come on now. 14-year-old. 45 years at 100%. 45 years at 100%. So when he came back to the juvenile facility, he was talking to Terry because Terry hadn't gone to court yet. And he was telling Terry, he didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to do. So he told him, he said, man, call your moms and pops and talk to them. And he said, man, I talked to them. They don't know what to tell me. They've never dealt with anything like this, and they just didn't know what to tell me. They said, trust your lawyer. And he said, I'm trusting my lawyer, but 45 years. He couldn't even imagine how many years that was. He's 14 years old. So he did the math, and when he did the math, he said, I'll be 59 when I get out. And keep in mind, his daddy, listen to him, his daddy wasn't even 59 years old. So he had no reference point to even gauge what 59 was. You understand what I'm saying? He didn't know what that meant. He didn't know how old his grandfather was. So he called home, and he talked to his grandfather, and he asked his grandfather, how old was he? And his grandfather told him he was 55 years old. And when his grandfather told him that he was 55 years old, that shook his world, because he looked at his grandfather's like, man, granddaddy looked like he'd been working hard all his life. You know, his granddaddy worked on a farm and stuff like that. Hard life, work with his hands. And he looked old to Jim. Keep in mind, Jim is 14 years old, and I want to keep re-emphasizing that. So he was thinking, I'm going to look like granddaddy when I get out. I'm going to look like granddaddy when I get out. So now he has a reference point, and it messed up his mind. It messed up his mind. So him and Terry, they start, buying weed. They would find somebody at the facility that had some weed. They start buying weed, and Jim started smoking weed heavy. Never smoked before he came to Juvenile. Never smoked. Now he's smoking weed. He's trying to forget. You know what I'm saying? So he told me when he would smoke the weed, he'd be laughing and happy and all. And he said just for a minute he could forget about his situation. But he said every time he smoked the weed, he'd get in trouble. He'd end up in a fight or something, and he would get in trouble, and he was making the situation worse. So he said he stopped smoking the weed, and when he stopped smoking the weed, all he had to do was think about his circumstances, and it messed his head up. Now, a couple of months later, Terry goes to court. He goes to court because his lawyer had put it off and all this and that, and Terry wanted to go to trial. He's looking at the situation that Jim was facing, because Jim hadn't made up his mind yet. But he was looking at the situation Jim was facing, and he didn't understand how much time he would possibly get if he got any. So he asked his lawyer, what am I looking at? And his lawyer told him, his lawyer said, I think I can plead you out for 20 years. And he said, 20 years? He said, that's a lot of time. And he said, considering, your charge, that's going to save you 5 years that you don't have to do, because you can get 25 years if you go to trial and get found guilty for second-degree murder. And usually, when you take a plea, most of the time the DAs, if you take a plea for second-degree murder, they can sentence you something outside the range. And when I say the range, what I mean is, if you go to trial for second-degree murder, you can get 25. But if you plead guilty, they can sentence you to more than 25. That's what I mean when I say outside the range. But in this situation, Terry's lawyer was going to make sure he got less than what he would get if he went to trial and got found guilty. He told him he would get him that. So when Terry got back to the cell, he told Jim what the situation was and what his lawyer had told him, and it made Jim mad. He was really hurt, but it made him mad. And he laid on the bunk and he started crying. And he said when he started crying, Terry said, what's wrong? He said, man, I'm still going to be in prison when you get out. And Terry told him, he said, man, but I'm going to always be there for you. I'm going to be your friend. He said, but it ain't over. We're going to fight. Now, these two 14-year-olds, they are forming a bond that is stronger than that super glue, that gorilla glue. You understand? They are becoming brothers in a way that most people could not understand. Terry is starting to see that Jim is going to need him and he's going to be relying on him. So they start to talk about things that they wanted to do together, and if they did take this time when they got to prison, how they were going to stick together. They had no clue how it worked. This is just how a lot of people talk when in the county jail or in the juvenile facility. They talk about we're going to have each other's back when we get there. We ain't going to take nothing from nobody, and so on and so forth, right? So the time came for Jim and Terry both to go to court and decide what they wanted to do. So Jim goes up in there and he pleads guilty. And the judge asked this 14-year-old, do you understand what you're doing? Now his parents are sitting in the courtroom too. And he asked this 14-year-old, do you understand what you're doing? If you plead guilty, you waive your right to appeal the decision and all this and that, all kind of stuff, right? And Jim looked at his lawyer, and his lawyer looked at the judge, and the judge looked at him, and he told the judge, he said, look, he understands. And the judge said, I need to hear him say it. 14-year-olds now. So Jim said, I understand, Your Honor. And he said, okay. And then he hit the gavel and sentenced him to 45 years in the state penitentiary at 100%. 100%. Now, what that meant for him is this. By him being 14, he would remain in juvenile until he was 18. Now, what that means is that he would be shipped off to prison, right? He would be shipped off to prison eventually, but he wouldn't be allowed on the compound in General Pop until he turned 18. So they kept him at the juvenile facility for the time being. Now, a couple of weeks later, Terry goes up in there, and he pleads guilty, and he gets 20 years. And the judge basically said the same thing to him that he said to Jim earlier in the week, a couple of weeks before. And Terry understood what was going on, so he took it, and he went back to the cell. And him and Jim were sitting in the cell talking about what they were going to do. Now the reality is starting to set in, because even the officers at the facility, at the juvenile facility, started treating them different. Even the other offenders that were there started to treat them different, because they were, in their mind, these adults now. You got adult time. You got real time. You got real time. Even the other juvenile offenders that were not violent offenders, they have 3, 4, 5 years, 6 years, maybe whatever. They were going home. And as Jim and Terry started to see all these other juveniles that they played basketball with, that they had gotten to know, and all these different things, they started to see them going home, and it started messing with their minds. And as it messed with their minds, it made them become bitter. But it made them closer and stronger as one. And so they met this female officer that came around. And she looked at him because she told them that she had a son their age. So she would talk to them and try to keep them up and tell them that things were going to be okay. But Jim, he couldn't understand how things were going to be okay. Even though he had talked to his grandfather, and his grandfather, told him how old he was, and he could get some kind of picture in his mind of what it looked like to be that old, right, in his 50s, which is what he was going to be when he got out. He was going to be 59. He still couldn't really fully comprehend that at 14. How many years is that? 45 years. That's a long time. So when he would talk to the female officer that tried to keep him and Terry encouraged, she tried everything she could to make him understand how many years that is. So she told him, she said, look, you're 14, right? In 14 more years, you're going to be 28. And then 14 more years after that, you're going to be 42. You understand what I'm saying? And then she kept on doing it like that, just adding it up for him so that he could see. And then it started to dawn on him, and it made him sad. It hurt him, because he was going to be in there over and over and over, right? He was going to be in there 4 lifetimes for him. Think about that, 4 lifetimes for him. The age he was now, it was going to be 4 times that plus some before he would be able to go home. And he spent his days and nights crying. And Terry, even though Terry had 20 years, he didn't see it the same way that Jim saw it, because he didn't have all of that baggage. Or at least he wasn't sharing it, because he didn't want to put anything more on Jim than he could handle. So Terry started making new friends. People that was going to be going to prison too, but didn't have 45 years, but had maybe 15 and 12 and stuff like that. And now all of these are juvenile offenders, but the 2 people that Terry started associating with, one of them was 16 and one of them was 17 years old. And they were using drugs, right? Listen to me. By the time they were 16 and 17 years old, these 2 individuals were hardcore drug users. They wasn't smoking it. They wasn't snorting it. They were shooting it. And when I say shooting, I mean with syringe, okay? Shooting it in the vein, in the arm. So Terry, being a 14-year-old, he followed suit. He followed suit. And he had never felt anything like that in his life. So one day when he came back to the cell, he was high as a kite. And Jim was like, what's wrong with you, man? What's going on with you? And he told him, he said, man, I'm high, I'm a little high. And he said, well, what are you doing? And he explained to Jim how he had, shot some cocaine in his arm and all of that. And Jim had no concept of what that meant. Yeah, he had seen people do this and do that and whatever. He had never seen anybody that he knew that did it and what it made him feel like. But it scared him because of the way that Terry was acting. He was looking out the door and all this and that and running back to the bunk, and he'll laugh and then he'll cry and then he'll get out on the floor and crawl around on the floor like he's looking for something. And then he'd get in the corner and just wrap up in the corner, be rocking back and forth and say, did you hear that? Did you hear that? And he wouldn't let Jim cut the lights off. He wanted the lights to stay on the whole time until he came down. He's paranoid. But he would do it over and over and over. And then one day, the officer yelled and told Jim and Terry, it's time to pack up. Shipping y'all off to the penitentiary. And that's when the real fear set in. It's time to put your big boy pants on now. That's what one of the officers told him. So before they left, they ship you out in the morning time. Before they left, they asked for the female off. They asked, where is she at? They wanted to talk to her. They were afraid, but they were juveniles and they didn't understand. You don't get to say bye. Put your stuff in the bag and let's go. And they wanted to talk to her, so they were like, oh, I want to talk to Officer such and such. I want to talk to her. And they were like, it's over with. Y'all are out of here. You're going to the penitentiary. So they shipped them off and they acted like two kids would act. Crying, throwing a temper tantrum. And the officers didn't want to hear that. They didn't have time for that. They put them handcuffs and them chains on them and put them in the back of their van and they drove them to the prison. And when they got to the prison, they processed both of them in. And they had been told that they were sellers at the juvenile facility. So they made sure to put them in the same cell in the prison, just to make the transition a little more easier, right? And when they did that, they talked to them and they asked them all kinds of questions and all told them they were going to have to go to school. It wasn't an option. Told them that they would not be able to come out. They gave them all the rules. They wouldn't be able to be around the adult offenders. They would be around other juvenile offenders, which it wasn't that many there at the time, only 2 or 3 other people. So they were able to come out and play basketball, but their movement was very, very, very limited. And they were not used to that. It shut them down. They didn't know what to do. They were having a hard time adjusting to that environment, to the restrictions. So they would always want to talk to the officers that come around, but the officers didn't have time to do that. They had to worry about everybody that's in the pod. They had to go door to door, check on everybody and all this and that because they were in the back. And when you're in the back as a juvenile, it's not PC, but it's administrative segregation, and you got other adult offenders in there as well. You can't talk to them, but they yell at you and talk to you. But at the same time, you're separate from them. You're separate from them. So they were in contact, but they wasn't in contact. You know what I'm saying? So Terry, when they would go to the rec pens, to the ball field, it was a space between the juveniles and the adults, but it wasn't so much space that they couldn't talk and make arrangements to do things and then have the rock man that's in the pod bring it to their cell and slide it under the door. And that's what Terry was doing. Terry found a way to get some drugs. And when he got the drugs, he was using them in the cell, and Jim was watching him. And it scared Jim to death. He didn't understand what was going on. He's watching this man, this boy, shoot drugs in his arm. He don't know what's going on. And then when he's watching how he's acting after that, it's like, what are you doing? It was all paranoid. You know how people get when they on that stuff and get paranoid? That's how Terry was doing in the cell. And Jim was terrified. But that was his friend. So he tolerated all the little things that he would be doing while he was high. And then when he would come down, he'd tell him, you can't be doing that. You're going to hurt yourself one day. You're going to hurt yourself one day. He said, no, I know what I'm doing. I got it under control. He's 14, getting ready to turn 15 years old. 14, getting ready to turn 15 years old. So they stayed back there from 14 to 15. From 15 to 16, making friends on the adult side, talking to them and all this and that. These adults saying, we're going to look out for you and all this and that. But at the same time, they're sending drugs back there. You understand? They're sending weed back there. At this particular time, Jim had started smoking weed again, but he wouldn't mess with the cocaine. So they're sending this stuff back there. So Jim and Terry not understanding what's going on, they were told by the adults, just call your mama and tell your mama or your daddy that you need some money and tell them to put the money on your books. Put the money on your books and you can buy some commissary, and then you send the commissary down here to pay for your drugs. They were learning how to maneuver inside an adult facility. So the parents would do it, send them money, and then they'd buy some commissary. And then back in the day, they would get the rock man, the officer wouldn't mind. They'd let the rock man get the stuff and then take it from cell to cell because everybody's locked down there and they want everybody to eat. So it keeps the peace down in the hole. Well, administrative state is just like the hole, y'all. So here we go. Now you got these two young juvenile offenders that are learning the bad side, the bad stuff that goes on in prison, the drug trade, all the trafficking and all of that. And the whole time, Terry is becoming a hardcore addict. Hardcore addict. Hardcore addict. And Jim is watching this happen to his friend. He's watching this happen to his friend. So after 16, they turn 17. And after 17, it's almost 2 months before they turn 18. So the counselors and everybody that they hadn't seen before, but the counselors that are on the regular compound in General Pop start coming back there to talk to them and tell them how things are going to be and what they should be expecting, and just trying to get them prepared for when they get out on the compound. And boy, I'm here to tell you, it was an eye-opener for both of them. It was an eye-opener, the stuff that they were telling them. And I need you to tune into the next episode so that you can find out what that is. This has been another episode of Dinner Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker.